Welcome back to Historical Projects, the podcast where we explore iconic achievements from the past to uncover timeless lessons in leadership, vision, and collaboration. I'm your host, David Jenkins. Today we are travelling all the way to New York City to explore one of the most extraordinary construction projects in human history. It's a great story. It's the Empire State Building. For example, did you know the Empire State Building was constructed at a pace of 4.5 floors per week? Every 7 days, another 18 metres of steel and stone rose into New York's skyline. And this all happened during the Great Depression. When I first discovered that, I had to double-check my numbers. It sounds impossible, but that's exactly what makes this project so extraordinary. The good news is, to help us unpack this remarkable story, I'm joined by Tillmann Boehme, an Associate Professor from an Australian university. Tillmann grew up in Germany and brings real passion to this amazing story, and I'm thrilled to have him here. Tillmann, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, Tillmann, so how did you get here? What's your background? How did a German end up in Australia? Tell me all about it.
Well, I'm a German that ended up in Australia, married to a Swedish who has a Thai mum. So multiculturalism runs deep into the family.
That is amazing.
Yes. How did I end up here? Well, I moved here from New Zealand, believe it or not. So long story short, I grew up in Germany, in the countryside, a small town called Porta Westfalica, Minden, close to Hanover, or if you hop on a train in Berlin, 2 hours west, that's my hometown. So it just gives you a bit.
How many people in the town?
28,000.
Okay, so it's a reasonable sized town.
16 villages in the 1970s merged together to create that township. I was ready to tackle university studies. So I went up to Kiel, which is next to Denmark, and studied business. And I wanted to become a container broker in the Hamburg ports. So that was my goal. The feedback from the Hamburg ports was that my business English wasn't good enough at the time. And at the same time, we had an international visitor coming out of Waikato University in New Zealand. And German students only had to pay domestic fees in New Zealand. So there was a special agreement between the countries, and I managed to get an MBA. And what I didn't realize is that this MBA now qualified me for a much bigger labor market. So I didn't have to go back to Germany, into the grey and the cold and the miserable weather and so forth. And I bumped into a young professor who took me on for a PhD, Paul Schilderhaus, and half of my PhD life was in industry. So I really loved that aspect of it. So they call me a pracademic, not necessarily an academic, so very practice-oriented. And yeah, I did my postdoc there too, met my wonderful wife. And
In New Zealand?
In New Zealand.
In New Zealand. God.
From all the places we met in New Zealand. The first job here was a lectureship in supply chain management. That brought me over to Australia, and now I'm here. Yeah, so that's kind of the long story, how I got here.
It's a cool story. It really is. Now, before we get started, our first podcast was all about coffee, and Allah from Yemen told us a wonderful story. So from now on, I'm asking everybody, what's it like to drink coffee in Germany?
Coffee is what makes the world go around. People say money is what makes the world go around, but I believe it's actually coffee. I'm a big coffee drinker. I'm addicted to
How
caffeine.
many a day?
3, I think.
Yeah.
But I stop after 1. I think with age, there's less tolerance in the afternoon coffees. I drink them strong, long, black, hot. This is my combination. I don't like too much milk in my coffees. But growing up in Germany, we had filtered coffee machines. And yeah, I think I started drinking when I was 14, 15 and never stopped.
Tillmann, do you remember the first time you saw the Empire State Building and how you felt, whether it was a photograph, a movie, or what was that like?
I've never been physically to New York myself. It's definitely on my bucket list. The first time consciously that I remember seeing the Empire State Building as a kid was on postcards that were sent from friends. And then it featured quite highly in cheesy US movies such as Sleepless in Seattle. But
I love that movie.
uh,
My wife and I watch it all the time. Even it's
still,
like
yes.
I still remember the way the old animation, the plane would fly backwards and forwards across the globe, across the world, America.
Yeah, it's one of the cheesy Christmas movie list for us too, but when I saw these postcards and how it's really stood out in the skyline of New York and saw these really remarkable architectural design, it's just very iconic. And so that's really where I say to myself, I really want to go to New York to visit that building.
Well, what I'd like to do now is let's talk about that building. So what I'm keen to understand here, let's go right back to the beginning. 1920s, 100 years ago, we're in New York. Can you tell us about what was actually happening? What was the story behind the Empire State Building?
Now, the story begins in the late 20s when New York City was in the middle of a skyscraper race. So they were just popping up like mushrooms, a bit like, Sydney had its period and Wollongong has kind of a current period of the same happening. Developers were competing to build the tallest building in the world, and I think for me that race is still not over. Like it's ongoing, but in the 20s it was definitely the case for Manhattan. It's a symbol of economic power and architectural dominance. So the Chrysler Building just claimed the title, and then 40 Wall Street wasn't kind of far behind. So that's, if you think about the 20s and just lots of construction happening in Manhattan, downtown, and it was kind of a race for the top. Then came the Empire State Project, right? Which then makes this moment remarkable in its timing. The stock market just crashed. We had the depression on the doorstep. And it affected not just the workers, but also the finance market. Money was getting really tight. Companies were cutting back, and the Empire State Building team made a very bold decision to just push forward with the project. Now, that bold decision, so in that financial market, I think you just got to let that sink in because it's unprecedented. A lot of developers would step back from projects like this.
It's really interesting you say that because at the moment we have live for us, we actually have the Iran conflict happening, and that's causing a lot of turmoil. And I know within industry, I talk to people I know that many projects are being put on hold because of that economic uncertainty. So it just is so remarkable that these people decided to plunge ahead in what we now see as probably the biggest economic downturn that we know of.
Yeah.
Tillmann, can you talk us through a little bit more about the construction? For example, its timeline, engineering and design of the Empire State Building.
Absolutely. Look, I don't know in particular around the whole planning cycle, and I assume that planning was not as tight as it is today. But if you look at the history of it, the construction began in March 1930, and what followed is still one of the most astonishing achievements in engineering history. So the entire building, as you alluded to earlier, is 102 stories, which was completed in just 1 year and 45 days. 102 stories. So you got to think that, let that sink in, because it is a tall building. We are now talking with developers in Australia more broadly who managed to get a mid-rise apartment done in a year construction time. 1 year for a mid-rise apartment in Australia as a comparison. We're talking about a 102-story building in over 1 year. Yeah, just over 1 year. So that for me is astonishing. I guess buildings weren't as complex back in the days. You got a lot of more technology going into these buildings today, but again, way ahead of its time.
It's interesting you share that because I know the Sydney Opera House took 14 years.
Oh, yes.
And for listeners of our podcast, you would have already listened to La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, which Derek talked about. So that's the tallest church in the world. That was 126 years.
Yeah.
And my favourite is another podcast that you'll listen to is Cologne Cathedral. And that's an amazing building, but that took 600 years to build. And when you think of those examples, it really helps you understand how revolutionary, whatever they did, it was just stunning.
Yes. And I do think that the Great Depression actually had a positive effect on this, because when you have a Great Depression like this, resources are scarce, you have to do more with less, and you're looking for shortcuts, probably the wrong word here, but you're looking for real strong efficiency gains wherever you can in order to bring this building completed on time and on budget, which this one was, shorter time frame, so ahead of budget and ahead of time.
I didn't realize that. So it was even under budget.
Yeah.
Under budget.
Yeah.
Ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
Whoa. And they created a beautiful, beautiful building. So they satisfied the scope, the budget, and the timing.
At its peak, more than 3,000 workers were on site every day. Just imagine, like, they call it the army of ants on construction sites. It's just so many, and you got to coordinate and get the most out of each worker every day. Again, just keep in mind the Great Depression as a background.
What I also found fascinating here was, when we were chatting, it was that a lot of them were immigrants.
Yep.
So they would not have been speaking the same language.
They worked in tightly choreographed sequences, steelworkers placing beams, riveters sealing joints, electricians and plumbers following just a few floors behind. So materials arrived daily and were installed almost immediately. And some of that was even welded off-site. So if you're thinking about manufacturing principles applied to construction, now you can see early beginnings of this style of construction in that building. The steel frame allowed unprecedented height, while the limestone facades gave it's a kind of timeless elegance, And so working with steel is, that robustness, that structural integrity was really strong. And then there's a famous mooring mast on the top. It was originally designed as a docking point for airships.
Really?
I had no idea. This came through the research, But you can imagine.
Wow, how visionary that is.
Yeah, there was a time of the Zeppelin, I guess, as well, And so, what a cool idea to have
science fiction
docking
stuff, isn't it? You could just imagine this massive airship coming to the top of it, docking, and people climbing down the ladder. What a story. So, Tillmann, we've talked about its origin and purpose. We then went and explored how they constructed this incredible building. Can you talk a little bit about its role and status in a modern New York City in 2026?
Well, when they first opened it in 1931, the Empire State Building became the tallest building in the world. And so, again, just coming out of a depression, or still being in a depression, that's just an iconic kind of benchmark that the city set. And the Empire State Building would have been similar to Germany winning the 54 World Cup post-World War II. It just gives us the morale and the boost and the confidence. And it held that title for nearly 40 years. So
that's a long time.
Yes.
That is a long time.
If you look at how much progress has been made in technology from 31 to 71, that just imagine, and they kept that title for 40 years. But it didn't end there, It's like it has earned its own zip code, which I really like. It's 10-11-8. So if you want to send a postcard, Sleepless in Seattle, it has its own zip code. But yeah, culturally iconic. It's a film. We talked about the postcards where I saw it first. You might even remember the beam and the workers dangling their feet is kind of one of those iconic pictures in there as well. It is a symbol of New York.
In doing a little bit of research on this, I was amazed as well for New York City, because this building is the number one tourist attraction for the city. It has 20 million visitors a year. The building itself takes gates receipts of about 100 million a year. They estimate hundreds of millions of dollars come into the New York City economy through hotels, restaurants, and all the supporting things around tourism. Surprisingly, it also has a 90% occupancy rate. So I keep thinking of those guys who sat back in the 1920s and saying, is it a good thing to do? Well, this building has just kept giving and giving and giving all the way through to 100 years later.
Its story will continue. So in more recent years, the building has undergone one of the most successful sustainability retrofits ever attempted, and now operates as a high-performance, energy-efficient tower, proving that even the most historic structures can adapt to modern expectations. So it will just keep being that icon for New York as the world transitions to energy efficiency and low carbon emission buildings.
Thanks, Tillmann. What a great entry into this wonderful story. So now we've explored that story, I would love to open up this and connect this incredible building to modern projects and leadership. I know there are so many lessons hidden within the story. The first thing I'd like to explore is, what do you think? What does this Empire State Building teach us about setting bold goals even when the environment is uncertain?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that one because it had the backing to push ahead. And I think for me, it comes down to real visionary leadership. So, and the vision cannot be around dollar signs. It cannot be just a lot of modern construction is around return on investment and cash to cash cycle times and so forth. But when you have these big uncertainties, if you want to motivate your team, you got to go beyond just the dollar earnings in those buildings and have a very strong vision that goes, really beyond, looking more broadly around social impact that some project like this can have. So the ones that I would pick is projects that really kind of resonate largely within society, that go beyond financial returns.
It's interesting you say that, because it's really about empowering your team around the vision of what you're doing. And I know I've talked about this before. I love listening to Simon Sinek, who's an American thought leader, and he keeps talking to us and saying that people don't buy what we do. People buy why we do it. And I'm imagining those 3,000 people building this, the why, the legacy that they've left. It's a story that you would tell your grandchildren and your grandchildren and your grandchildren.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. It's really the why is so important, and the vision. And I also agree that in today's world, a lot of our architecture isn't necessarily coming with the strong why. It's very much a what we're trying to do.
And even though the Sydney Opera House took 14 years, I'm glad
I am too.
what an icon for Sydney. And we need more of these buildings, iconic buildings that have impact beyond just the occupancy, right? It draws so many tourists. I think we got to look just beyond this silo of the building and see what the building can achieve, attract tourism,
Yes.
and so forth. I'm at awe, but with the Empire State Building in particular, because if you also think about it, you have a great recession. What a bold move to go ahead. I bet you the workers would go over and beyond, because there are no other projects.
Yes.
Oh, well, there probably are a few others or went ahead, but if you had a job, you hang on to it. So everyone worked literally.
Very focused.
Yes,
Very
hard.
focused, for sure. Something else I've been thinking about, and I'm keen to get your thoughts. How do you personally approach leadership when timelines feel impossible? And we've been chatting already about your current job and the pressures you're feeling. How do you do that? How do you approach that?
How do I approach this? Now, yes, so I've just stepped up. I have reporting lines, I have project teams and working on different projects, and timelines come and go, and sometimes, they fly by. How do I do it? I think work ethics is a big component in the way that I grew up. You say you do, you do. I go over and beyond what's required, leading by example, the team. At the same time, as a leader, I shield my team from these external pressures. I don't let them seep in so that they can focus on the task ahead to make sure that we are working towards schedule. Because I'm also, like yourself, I go into these projects well prepared. So I have Gantt charts, I have timelines, and I have good project planning. But that means I need to shield the team from all these external pressures so that they can stay on task while I lead by example, but also shield the team at the same time.
Now, it's interesting you say that, because the planning for the Empire State Building must have been meticulous.
Absolutely.
And it's actually that you've got me thinking about that is, if you've got an impossible deadline, start planning. Because often we start doing.
Yes.
When you're under the pump and you're scared by this deadline, you start just running around doing things. But what that teaches me is start planning.
Yes.
Don't start doing, start planning, because they could not have achieved what they did at the Empire State Building without some thorough planning. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll say my approach to planning has changed over the years, where I now have a much more collaborative approach to planning. I want to get everyone expertise into my plan, share them widely, and get a lot of input so that I can make more robust decisions. In the past, I always felt, I'm the project lead. Here's a plan, off we go. So I've become a lot more listening focused. I wasn't a good listener. I've become a lot better at listening.
Look, it's a skill that's so critical, isn't it?
Yeah,
and it's a skill that we all struggle with. You're not alone with that. My next question's just a natural flow to where we've been discussing these different concepts. The construction relied on extraordinary coordination. We know steel arrived daily, teams working in tight sequences. What modern projects remind you of that level of choreography?
Well, there are quite a few. I think one, I haven't followed it very tightly, but if I just look at the Western Sydney airport, I would say, just from a pure construction time approach, fairly quick. If you compare that with Berlin, which took 12 years to open up, or 9 years.
Because I believe it's about 7 years. That's their total from start to finish.
Yeah.
They anticipated.
Yeah. So I'll say they were running a tight ship there. But we have worked with construction companies here in Australia to understand their mid-rise apartment approaches. And they're not really iconic buildings, but we learned from the Empire State Building, building floor by floor, doing some off-site manufacturing principles applied to construction. And then there is a piece of software called Last Planner System, which is a collaborative approach to planning. And if you bring that all together, you're actually assembling a supply chain that has lean principles embedded in them. And we have managed to actually get some of the very first prefab manufactured mid-rise apartments up in Spain, now moving into Miami. So
it's a prefab design.
Yes.
A modularized type thing.
Modularized mid-rise apartments. And a lot of that was actually inspired by how the Empire State Building has been constructed in the 1920s and 30s.
I'm almost visualizing shipping containers, like these big boxes of things just coming to site and just assembled.
Yeah, so these days we used cold form steel, flat packed, stacked up, and then you have bathroom pods, like fully assembled bathrooms just dropping in. We have cassette floors. We have prefabricated balconies. They just get clipped on. Now, these buildings, they went up in no time.
That is cool.
Yeah. And again, really inspired by the Empire State Building.
Taking that concept a little bit further around the modularization, so what do you believe the Empire State Building teaches us about experimenting, iterating, and learning in real time?
Look, they would have made adjustments consistently, to their approaches in order to drive efficiency and find more efficiency in the construction approach. We've done almost exactly the same in Spain, right? So these mid-rise apartments, we went from full modular or almost full modular to then say, well, some of the things don't make sense modular because you need 2 cranes, or it drives inefficiencies in other parts of the supply chain. So I think the third project that we've done was the one where we said, well, we've nailed it. So it's almost like, there's these iteration cycles and you learn from each project. The problem we have in construction is that not one supply chain is the same in all projects, right? So you always look for local workers, local painters, local, subbies. And what we had in Spain was that consistency of the supply chain. So the learning would happen across the supply chain.
Yes.
In a very, very collaborative team that even signed collaborative contracts.
So the intent and the why and the vision, there was a bigger thing going on around collaboration, win-win.
Yeah.
It was quite different to that competitive. And do you think that made a difference?
Hugely. So these projects were so successful that startup company of my former student now was invited to work with the construction industry in Miami. To go high-rise, no more mid-rise, go high-rise.
To use the same lessons
Yeah.
from the mid-size to a high-rise.
Yeah. And it's all, you can experiment and simulate and so forth, but when you hit the ground running and actually doing it in practice, which our project's done in Spain, this is where the real learning happens. On a computer you can simulate and so forth, but the real learning is when the project goes live.
You're right. Tillmann, we're about to wrap up, and I just want to turn it over to you and ask, when visiting this incredible place, because it's on your bucket list, do you have any must-do suggestions, such as the subway?
I think I'm just going to grab a steel beam and swing my legs and have a New Yorker pastrami sandwich with a strong hot black coffee. That would be wonderful. Now, joke aside, I think New York City is the place that never sleeps, and it offers opportunities for every taste buds. I love food and I love jazz. So my wife and we're really big jazz fans, and I see myself enjoying soaking in the nightlife and go clubbing from one jazz basement to the next jazz basement.
Fantastic. So thanks so much, Tillmann, for taking us on this journey. What an incredible conversation. The Empire State Building reminds us that even in the toughest circumstances, the Great Depression, a bold vision paired with disciplined execution can create something that lasts far beyond its original purpose. As I said earlier, that building just keeps giving and giving 100 years later. Today we explored the ambition, the coordination, the innovation, and the resilience. Tillmann, thank you again for sharing your insights and stories. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks, David. It was my absolute pleasure to be part of your conversation today.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on Historical Projects. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who loves history, engineering, or leadership. Join the community and be part of the journey where history meets modern project success. I'm David Jenkins. Until next time.